Hello, everyone. Welcome to Whiskey Uncorked. My name is Brian. Just editing version of me jumping on, and just wanted to let you all know that this particular video, the camera was jumping in and out of focus pretty much the entire recording. I believe my mic was just pushed a little bit more closely than it normally is, and the camera was having a hard time deciding on what to focus on. It's happened before, um, and I as soon as I stop thinking about it, the one time I don't think about it, of course, um, I'm met with a fuzzy video basically for the entire length of it. So I apologize up front if it bothers you. You can try just listening to more podcast style, just listen to the audio. And if you need to skip this one, I understand, of course. It's been difficult just getting videos out in the last month or two. So I thought about trying to reshoot it and everything, and I can't I couldn't afford like an extra obstacle that I wasn't expecting. So I hope you understand. Thank you again for all your support, and I hope you do enjoy the content in this video despite the camera issues. Welcome everyone to Whiskey Uncorked. My name is Brian, and we're back this week. Not necessarily a review, but there was a topic I wanted to dive into, and the reason I wanted to jump into this particular topic, which is port influenced whiskey, was that if it hasn't been clear by watching my other videos this year, I've been doing what I think some other people are doing. I think a lot of other people are probably doing, and that's going through all of the bottles of whiskey that they've bought over the last 5 years or so, maybe even longer than that, that have been just sitting on their shelf, kind of gathering dust, particularly the ones that don't really, at least for me, didn't really have a reason to, things that I bought with every intention of opening them up and drinking them, and for one reason or another, just having too much, having bought something and then waited a couple months and then I was kind of onto something else or whatever it was, I ended up with a bunch of stuff that was kind of sitting on my shelf, gathering dust, as I said, and there wasn't really a reason to, right? Not super special bottles, not things that I was saving for any particular reason or even just future me to kind of come back, circle back around and enjoy, which most of the stuff that I have tucked away are things that I've had. I've had a bottle of them and I was able to track down a second one. There's some exceptions, of course, but anyways, what happened was in the last few weeks, I noticed that I had a few bottles of port influenced scotch that I had not opened yet. And I said, you know what, why don't we crack these open, start giving them a try, and add them to a couple of bottles that I have already had open. And I even have reviewed one on this channel that we'll talk about in just a second. But, and I realized at that point that I've got like 5, 6 bottles of port influenced whiskey open now. And I'm certainly not going to do a review on them. There's a bunch of independent bottlings that were from several years ago, that sort of thing. But port influenced scotch in particular, and we can talk about port influenced American whiskey, particularly bourbon. Port's actually a fairly well-known finishing wine in the finished bourbon world. Angel's Envy in particular, probably being the most well-known example of port finished bourbon out there. But anyways, I'm trying not to go down too many tangents here, but yeah, so I ended up with these 5 plus 1, 2, 3, 4. I actually have 6, at least to some degree, port influenced whiskeys open on my shelf right now. And port does tend to be on the more divisive side of just in the Scotch world, right? It kind of falls in the same category as red wine finished whiskeys or even matured Scotch whiskeys, where there's a pretty decent chunk of people who just avoid them entirely. Me, I tend to, even if I don't like a particular style of whiskey, I will bash my head against the wall for as long as possible until either A, I learn to like it, or it's just clear to me that it's not happening and maybe I should come back. But port is one of those where I've had decent overall experiences with port. It's not necessarily something that would get me super excited at this point, although curious is probably a much better word. I think I mentioned not really planning on doing any actual reviews here. More so just kind of run through these bottles, give you a little bit of uh, a rundown of what I think, and particularly when it comes to the independent bottlings. I think that's where I probably have the most to say, whether it's interesting or not. I almost said interesting thing to say, but that's not for me to decide. Anyways, just gonna run through them, and maybe there's one that I might do at some point over the summer. We'll kind of see how I'm feeling. But yeah, why don't we jump into at least the examples that I have? And actually, before we do that, it's been a couple weeks since I've done this, so forgive me. But yeah, let's actually talk about what port is. So very briefly, what is port? Port is a fortified wine from Portugal. This is opposed to sherry, which is a fortified wine from Spain. There are other differences in the production process. It's very deep rabbit holes you can go down. You can nerd out about those things just as much as whiskey, it appears. I am certainly not an expert on either. However, if you are new to this, just know that a fortified wine is a wine that has had extra alcohol added to it. In this case, it's going to be brandy, at least most of the time, similar with sherry. So that basically it raises the ABV. Port, I think I was reading, tends to be around 20%, where your wine, your regular red wines, I think they're kind of in that 12, 14-ish percent range, somewhere in there. So there's a number of different techniques, number of different types of grapes, and there are a number of different styles of port and sherry. So port, the one thing that I read that seems to separate the two the most is that port, when it is fortified, when it has the extra alcohol added to it, it's added while the wine is still fermenting. And by adding the spirit while it's fermenting, it stops the fermentation process, leaving a lot of extra sugar that had not yet been consumed by the yeast. This obviously is going to make it a bit sweeter. Sherry tends to have, well, sherry has its fortification done, the extra alcohol added after the fermentation process is done. It doesn't mean that sherry cannot be sweet. There are very sweet sherries, but sherry tends to be a much broader category in terms of the breadth of sweetness and nuttiness. Obviously, even just Oloroso and PX or Pedro Jimenez that tend to be used in the whiskey making process, or the barrels that were used to age that stuff. They can have very different effects on the whiskey. But port does generally tend to be a lot sweeter. So that in and of itself can turn some people off, particularly if you are not if you're not an American who just sweetness is just part of, it's like spice in some other countries, right? We don't even notice it. Other people can barely eat it or drink it in this case. Drinking bourbon, as a bourbon drinker myself, I tend not to notice the sweetness nearly as much. And I'll talk about that in just a second. But there is also the question not only of the sweetness, that's why someone may not like port, and that is it does tend to be, even in my experience, pretty aggressive. It has a way of dominating the spirit, even in bourbons. I think if people are not careful, even a strongly flavored spirit like bourbon can be taken over by an overactive port cask if you're not paying super close attention. Scotch, in particular, can be completely overrun as well, obviously. And port casks also do seem to suffer from similar issues as like the red wine casks, as I mentioned. They can get kind of sharp, tart, overly sulfury, and it's easy. I think it's really easy for a port cask to kind of get out of control, and that can pose, I'm sure, some challenges for the whiskey makers in just kind of making sure that they're getting the flavors they want out of the cask without it going too far.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of people's experience is that, at least for their palate, the port influence does go too far. But we're going to start talking about the whiskeys really briefly that I have, and just maybe find a good middle ground if you're interested in either trying a port whiskey or maybe you just haven't had a lot of good luck with it. Uh, yeah, let's start talking about those and just to see what I found, at least through my admittedly limited experience. All right, so the most available, ubiquitous, well-known bottle of port influence Scotch, at least, is going to be your Glenmorangie Quinta Ruban. I don't think there's any question about that. 46% ABV, unchill filtered, natural color, all that good stuff. One of the more affordable 14-year-old age statements you could probably find out there, at least from a respectable distillery. And yeah, I reviewed this earlier in my channel. I gave this a 6 out of 10. I enjoy this one. It's done really well in blinds, I think even recently. Let's see, what else is there to say? Yes. Similar to what I was saying earlier, some of the comments under that video were that whiskey is just way too sweet for me. I don't like it, and yeah, it's gonna be a matter of preference. So if you do not like sweet Scotch, this might be one to avoid for you. But I do tend to enjoy this one. It's not my favorite bottle in the world. 6 out of 10, above average. And as I mentioned, it does well in blinds, even when I don't know what it is. Although I don't know how great of a representation, if this is your one example of port influenced whiskey, if you're going to jump into other styles, I don't know if this one's going to prepare you quite as well as maybe it should. But yeah, if you are super curious, it's probably a good place to start, as long as you don't mind the sweet whiskey. Although if you don't like sweet whiskey, then maybe port isn't going to be your thing to begin with. All right, number 2 is what is in my glass, what I've been drinking today, and that is the Aaron Port Cask Finish edition. This is 50% ABV, all the natural presentation you could ask for, and this is one of their kind of, it's not really a special release collection, but they have a number of non-age stated, mostly wine cask influenced whiskeys. They have a sherry, they have a sauternes, they have the Amarone or Amarone, I'm not sure how that's pronounced actually, and they have the port alongside their bourbon barrel, which is the quarter cask, the Bothy. So this one, I'll take a quick sip of this one, but this one is maybe as a whiskey enthusiast, and maybe if you've had some rough experiences with port, and it's just overpowering, and just, or maybe the Glenmorangie is just too sweet for you, this might be a good compromise, a good toe in the water for getting to know a tamer approach. At least this edition, obviously, Aaron, this is one of those bottles that's been on my shelf for a couple of years, just recently opened it. But this one, I feel the finish is well controlled. There's definitely port in there. It has not overrun the Aaron spirit, so you can still taste the Aaron in here. It's a pretty nicely balanced whiskey, and at 50% ABV, you're going to get a good pop of flavor as well. Here we go. Cheers. Starts out sweet up front when it first hits your tongue, but once you swallow the ABV, the Aaron character, the malt, is still able to power through. It's a nice oily character, mouth coating, clingy, nice strawberry fruitiness added to it. It's not, I'm not really picking up too much sulfury notes here. This one is really actually very good. This one sat on my shelf for too long, and I have actually enjoyed this from the first glass that I sipped. It is really nice. It's well balanced. It's youthful, but it's not grainy. It's not. Aaron does a good job with the additions of this that I have had. I really like the quarter cask. There was a long time I would have said the quarter cask was better than the 10-year-old. I haven't had the quarter cask in a while, so I don't know if I still think that. The sherry, the bodega version, was pretty heavily sherried, if I remember correctly. But again, it's been a while. But this one is actually really good. You're getting a little nuttiness, getting that strawberry, but that Aaron character is still able to fight through, and the youth, I think, helps, and very careful barrel finishing here. One more, and we're going to move on to the next bottle. Cheers. All right, one interesting one is from a couple years ago. Lefroy released this edition of the Carchus White Port and MadiRaa. Most port that you'll see, if it tells you what style of port it is going to either be ruby port or tawny port. These are red ports. And again, rabbit hole, I'm not going to drag this video out any longer than it needs to be. Well, I probably will still do that, but we'll try to limit it. Anyways, this came out, I think this would have been 2023, I think. 52.3%. Yeah, so the 23 would indicate 23. Not my absolute favorite Carchus, but still really good. Very enjoyable. Not entirely port, in this case white port, which is, at least in my experience, pretty unusual. White port meaning they used white grapes to make it. And the MadiRaa edition really creates a pretty interesting, complex Lefroy. And in some ways, this is one of my more favorite Carchus releases because it's different. It's a well done example of a special release doing something a little outside the box, getting some, especially the combination of casks here. I respected this release quite a bit, even though it wasn't necessarily going to make my top 3, 4, 5. Well, maybe top 5, because I haven't had some of the older Carchus releases. But yeah, still really good, really enjoyable. Not sad to still have a little bit of this in the bottle, and a good example, one of the few examples that I have seen that might give you an idea of what white port can do to a Scotch. All right, now we're going to talk about the 3 independent bottlings I have on my shelf. We have a single cask nation Linkwood, 12 years old. This is was finished for 1 year and first fill ruby port, 54.4%. This is a Mossburn Craigellachie, 13 years old, aged in a ruby port hogshead. It does not say that it was finished or anything like that. I kind of doubt it was the entire 13 years, but it could be. It doesn't say finished, so you might have to take their word for it. And then finally, this brother of from the Hart brothers, a 15-year-old Benriach in a first fill port pipe, modeled at 56.5%. So the thing I will say about basically all 3 of these bottles is watch out. This, I think, is where a lot of people get their impression of port whiskey, because there aren't a ton of official bottling port whiskeys. There was an 8-year-old Kilkerran from a couple years back that people really loved. At least a lot of people really loved that one. It was a little middle of the road for me at the time. That was one that I happened to end up with a second bottle of it. I think I bought it for a gift, but they already had something, so I got them something else. Anyways, I think I do still have a bottle tucked away somewhere. I did enjoy that one, but I don't know if I loved it quite as much as some other people. But these independent bottlings, the ones that I've had, are not messing around. They are very flavorful. They do tend to drink hotter than their ABV, in my personal opinion. However, with a little time, with the bottle open, they have all kind of calmed down a little bit. This Linkwood in particular, generally, if you say single cask nation and Linkwood in the same sentence, I'm there, which is why I own the bottle of this. Found it, I think I got this a couple years even after it was released. Yeah, this is bottled in 2021. I did not buy this in 2021. It was hanging out on some random website that I took a roll of the dice on. I actually got some pretty nice dusty whiskeys from for a decent price. Anyways, 54.4%. This drank way hotter than that. Has calmed down recently. You can see I'm probably quarter of the way through the bottle at this point. The last dram of this I had was not quite as bad. Mossburn is a independent bottler that I've never had like a bad bottle from them. I don't know if I've had a good one either. This Craigellachie, though, is pretty good. And if I remember it, I got this for really cheap when this, I think I bought this in Colorado. Yeah, it was bottled in 2022. I think this was like a $55 independent bottling of, I think it was cheaper than the standard 13-year-old. And then I got a good deal on this Hart Brothers as well, because I think K&L was doing kind of like a little clearance a year or two ago of some of these Hart Brother bottlings, and I bought a whole bunch of them for like, came up to like $50 or $60 a bottle. Different age statements, that sort of thing. But I intended to get pretty good deals on all of these, but they are all very aggressive, both in the heat that they're coming at you with, at least in the early parts of the bottles, and flavor. Yes, there's a tartness, I think, in pretty much all of them, outside of maybe the Hart Brothers. This one is tight, but it's not necessarily super tart. There's a very strong strawberry in that one, but also kind of a very dry citrusy note, like a grapefruit. Very interesting. But what I will say is all three of these with water get significantly better. Probably the amount of water you'd want to add varies, but these are all beasts that kind of need to be tamed a little bit. Those port casks, even for a 1 year finish sort of thing in the linkwood, it benefits greatly from just toning it down a little bit. And when I add a good amount of water, this is what I've done: add a good amount of water, more than I normally would add, maybe approaching like Ralphie levels, and let it sit there for like a half an hour. And in each case, these actually turn out to be 3 really solid whiskeys. The Hart Brothers, 15 years old. It's a port pipe, so this is probably a good dose of European oak. So you're getting some of that herbal spice, a little bit more woody at 15 years old. First fill barrel. This one, it has a lot of potential. I'm looking forward to getting a little bit further into this one. BenRiach, if you've been following the channel, I have had rough luck with some BenRiachs. Although I have had good ones, they tend to be much older age statements. Any more of the more contemporary things haven't really done it for me. But I have a sherry Hart Brothers that I actually think is really, really good. And this port is shaping up to probably be a pretty good bottle as well. But you do need to, at least for me, I definitely need to add water to all 3 of these to just make them taste like whiskey, to be fair. So I can definitely see why if this is your experience with port whiskey or port influenced whiskey, you may be like, nah, no thanks. Especially if you aren't naturally drawn to experimenting with water. I'm not naturally, but if there's a bottle that I'm like, ooh, this is not my favorite, the first thing I do is add a teaspoon of water, like a good dollop of water to it, just to see, like, forget the drop or 2 at a time thing. Like if a bottle's rough and it's being tough to kind of get through, and you don't really want to even pour yourself a glass, just dump some water in it and don't draw that process out. That's my opinion, and just see what happens. Some of these, particularly if they're cask strength and they're hot or they're drinking hot, they can usually take a pretty good amount of water, and it will take a good amount of water for things just to kind of balance out. But like I said, water isn't my first instinct when opening a bottle of whiskey either. But like I said, my experience tells me that there's a number of bottles that I've owned over the years that a good splash of water completely saved a bottle for me. So don't be afraid to try it at least. But if you are just getting into port and you're trying to dip your toe, I would definitely look towards the Glenmorangie or the Arran first. Find something that is not as, even like I said, a 1 year finish out of 12 doesn't seem like it would be that aggressive, but it can be. Particularly if that barrel itself maybe wasn't super fresh and had soured a little bit. You get a little bit more of those heavy sulfury notes, and it can tartan up and get sour real fast. So just buyer beware there. All right, moral of the story: dip your toe into port if you haven't yet. If you've tried port influenced whiskeys and you can't do it, don't blame you. Although there are examples out there that do a pretty nice job of kind of taming the aggressiveness down. And if you find yourself with a glass or a bottle that is aggressive, water helps. It'll help. It might not fix it, You might not be super happy. But yeah, don't go over the top with buying a super expensive bottle unless you already know how you feel about port, and maybe specifically the style of port, and certain independent bottlers who have established a reputation for knowing how to handle aggressive or touchy casks, let's say. There is a big difference. I mentioned Angel's Envy earlier. The port finished bourbon. It's a very common bourbon here in the U.S. I don't hear about it when I first got into bourbon. It was a pretty big. It seemed like a pretty big deal. I don't hear about it quite as much. It's everywhere. So bourbons that are super available tend not to ever get mentioned by anybody online. It's just yeah, everybody's looking for the next big release, or the super highly allocated stuff, or crazy single barrels, that sort of thing. Anyway, if you're a bourbon drinker, I do like Angel's Envy, the standard one. It's okay. It's a little low on the ABV side for me. I have a single barrel from a store pick that I picked up a while ago, and I remembered I had it. It kind of get tucked away because finished bourbon isn't my go-to. I kind of have to think about it, and that one is I poured a glass the other night knowing I was probably going to be making this video, and it was actually pretty good. I actually really enjoyed it. Also, I have a River Roots bottling. It's from a local group, did a barrel pick here. It's over 14 years old. I think it's like 14 years, 7 months, and it's hazmat. It's over 140% ABV. I think it's 74.5 or something like that. That is a great example of a port influenced whiskey that does not make the whiskey hotter. That thing, even at right around 75% alcohol, it drinks better than some stuff around 65%, 60%. It's delicious. The age, it's a real masterful job. I still wonder why you're gonna finish like a 14-year-old bourbon in a barrel of port, or an export barrel. It's a ballsy move, but the result, at least in this case, was pretty good. Although not the cheapest bottle of bourbon that's on my shelf. So, port can be this thing that can go one way or the other. It can be utterly fantastic. It can be, with the Kilkerran 8 release, again, a lot of people think that was one of the better releases since that 57.1 sherry barrel from 2019 or 2020, whenever that was. One of my favorite all around bottles of whiskey. That there's definitely one of those in the stash. And but yeah, take it easy with port. Dip your toe in. Start easy, and just know if you're gonna buy an independent bottling, you're kind of entering the Wild West a little bit. If you can't try it first, you don't know what you're going to get. Give the bottle time. Be patient with it. Let it open up. Experiment with water, and you might find something that you really like. But I'm going to wrap it up. I've been talking long enough. Thank you for sticking around and watching these style of videos. If you want more of them, let me know below. And until next time, I really appreciate it. Hit like, comment, subscribe, the whole thing.